We know the work you do is valuable. The Australian Social Value Bank will give you the ability to calculate your organisation's social impact. All you need to do is select the social outcome from the list, enter how many people benefit, and how much the program costs. The ASVB calculator does the rest. The ASVB makes social impact measurement accessible, affordable, and achievable, making sure the work that you do counts.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for spending some time with me today to find out how the ASVB works to make social impact measurement simple. My name is Min Sito and I'm the Executive Officer of Alliance Social Enterprises. We're a non-for-profit certified social enterprise who's collaborated with Symmetrica Jacobs, global leaders in social value analysis, wellbeing research and econometrics, to bring you the Australian Social Value Bank, a tool that offers you a simple yet robust approach that allows anyone to conduct rapid social impact assessments. Now, in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to commence the webinar by acknowledging the First Nations people, the traditional custodians of these unceded lands where we are all located. Each of these nations faithfully cared for country for thousands of years, and I'd like to acknowledge their continued connection to land, sea, and culture. I'm joining you from Anaiwan country today, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I'd also like to welcome any First Nations people that might be joining us today. I'd like to encourage you to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that you're dialing in from in the chat window. Now, just briefly, a little bit about me. I've spent the majority of my career in the management of community services, mostly working with young people in the areas of alcohol and other drugs, alternative education, training and employment, and more recently in community housing and homelessness. I have an intimate understanding of the constant changes and challenges in trying to design, deliver, and sustain programs and non-for-profit organisations. I'm also really passionate about the need to transition to a wellbeing economy where social and environmental impacts are included in decision-making as part of economic considerations. And to me, this really starts with being able to understand and quantify social value. But that is enough about me. So today we have people here from across the NGO sector, government, as well as from the corporate sector. So I'm just going to open up a quick poll so we can see what's your main reason for attending this webinar. Just pop that one up, sharing it now. So if you pop over to the chat window, you can answer that poll for me and we'll find out why you're here with us today. Now, while that poll is open, I'll do just a few pieces of housekeeping. I'd really like to encourage you all to use the chat window to ask questions as they come to mind, and I'll do my best to address them at the end of the session. If I don't get to everyone's questions, I'll follow up with you afterwards via an email. And before anyone asks, you will be sent a link to the recording of the session in a follow-up email, as well as a link to my calendar. So if you wish to make a time with me to discuss the specific impact measurement needs of your organisation, you can do so using that link. And for those of you who like what you hear in today's session, we also do offer another free webinar, which goes through step-by-step how to use the value calculator, as well as looking at the methodologies that sit behind the tool. So you can register via our website's training page, and I'll actually just post a link to that in the chat now. If you'll bear with me, that in the chat window. There we go. So there's that link to our training page now. Okay, let's have a look at the poll results. So today's poll results are fairly evenly spread, but with a slight majority of you wanting to learn how to make impact measurement simple. It's great to see that some of you are considering using the ASVB in your work, and there's also a few of you who are keen to know more about the ASVB methodology. So for those people, I'd probably suggest attending the How to Calculate Your Social Value webinar, which I put the link to in the chat. Okay. So in today's session, we're going to talk about why we want to measure social impact, as well as some of the common challenges organisations face when measuring social impact. And then I'm going to explain exactly what the ASVB is, which will include the ASVB value calculator, as well as just touching briefly on the methodology. Then I'll explain how the ASVB is different to other impact measurement tools out there. And we'll look at some of the people who are using the ASVB, as well as the subscriber benefits. So if that all sounds good to you, and that's what you signed up for, let's get to it, shall we? Now, in our current crazy COVID environment, we've seen a large increase in people's awareness around the need to consider both the environmental and social impact of our decisions. And the changed economic and social context that we find ourselves in means that there will be increased demand for social services and reduced funding available, as well as increased scrutiny on the outcomes produced from any money invested. Now, those of you here in New South Wales would be aware that the government transition to outcomes budgeting is well underway, with specialist homelessness services having now transitioned to outcomes-based contracts. Moving to outcome budgeting is really about increasing transparency around performance and accountability. There'll also be a much greater focus on social procurement as we try to ensure that positive social outcomes can be achieved from within our existing spend. Now, these changes will impact all of you, those in government, philanthropy, not-for-profit, social enterprise, and the corporate sector. How you assess value within your decision-making will need to change. And that's really at the heart of what we're talking about today. I mean, I think it's fair to say most people are clear why they want to measure their impact. The difficulty starts when you're trying to work out how. And very quickly, you find yourself down what I refer to as the social impact measurement rabbit hole. When I was tasked with leading the social impact measurement journey of the community housing provider that I worked for, I very quickly found myself totally overwhelmed. I mean, it felt like the more I learned, the more confused I got. So I'm going to open up another quick poll asking what problem or search for a solution has brought you to the ASVB. So bear with me while I open that other poll up. Okay, if you'd like to pop over to the chat window and just tick the answer that applies to you, that would be great. Let's have a look. So we've got some people who are admitting they just don't know where to begin, which I totally relate to. Some people who are comparing some different solutions, which is always a good way to start. And some people who are already measuring their outcomes and just want values. So, certainly if you have your outcomes framework in place and now you're doing that next step of moving from outcomes to actually looking at social value, then ASVB is a great tool for you. Now, in the last 6 years or so, I've learnt that impact measurement is a journey, and the most important thing is to just get on the road, because the best way to learn is by doing it and refining as you go. I mean, there are a number of different methodologies you can use, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, and it's really about trying to find an approach that works for you in your situation and gives you the information that you need. Next slide. So these challenges on this slide are framed at the delivery organisation, but it's important to recognise that measurement and evaluation starts at the procurement or design phase of social programs, knowing what outcomes are being purchased or what problem is trying to be solved. One of the main challenges faced by everyone trying to measure impact is resourcing. Most people have limited or in lots of cases, no budget for impact measurement. And quite often you find that the role of impact measurement is just tacked on to someone's, role. And so they're still required to, deliver all their other deliverables, as well as impact measurement, which is obviously a real challenge, and why often impact measurement, gets left to fall by the wayside. It's also, an incredibly complex area. You do need a certain level of expertise. And, like we've already mentioned, there are a range of different methodologies that you can use. So even just trying to understand those and which is the right approach can be a challenge. Then the actual evidence, like knowing what evidence you need to collect to be able to verify your outcomes. And, even that process of data collection itself, people kind of don't even think about that. But when it comes to actually rolling that out, particularly if you have a large organization across, lots of programs, and potentially across Australia or beyond, how you go about collecting data and what's an appropriate method of data collection for your particular client group that you're working with, that can be quite a challenge for some organizations. And then, of course, how you go about valuing your impact is, a very tricky, challenging kind of area or component of social impact measurement. And it's generally, something that's left to the experts, understandably. And even, the experts are often using or referring to other reports that have been done. And so then, those values are only as rigorous as the original study, and how closely that that the original study was based on aligns to your program. So, it becomes very complex, just knowing how to place values on different outcomes. And then once you've got, sorted all of that, there's the actual credibility of those results. Being able to translate the outcomes or the value of your outcomes is a challenge. If you decide that you're not going down the monetization route, then it can be difficult for people to grasp the true value of the work that you're doing. And that's the main thing, is, when you're trying to communicate the value of the work that you do to your stakeholders, it needs to be in a way that they can, really grasp instantly the value of what you're doing. And that's where monetization is a real strength. And I guess, the other thing is that you want your results to be transparent. People need to be able to read in and understand how you've achieved, your results. You want the methodology to be robust, proportionately so. It doesn't make sense to invest huge sums of money to evaluate programs if, the actual investment in the program is small. You wouldn't want to spend more on your evaluation than you do on your program. And ideally, you also want to be able to compare your results. That's kind of the key thing that has really been missing up until now, is that ability to compare different programs and look at, what is the value of those different programs to help us make decisions about where we should invest our money. So they're the main types of challenges that people face when trying to start measuring their social impact. And, we're already seeing increased reporting requirements and impact measurement expectations come through across the different funding streams. And if you are wearing the hat of a program funder today, even if that's allocating your internal budget towards different programs, I want you to think about how you could use the ASVB in the context of procuring outcomes or deciding which programs to fund, and what type of impact reporting would be most useful to you, as well as the challenges that face the organisations or your staff who are trying to provide this information to you. And when you're assessing whether an approach is a good fit, there are a few questions I recommend people ask themselves. So firstly, why do we want to measure our impact, and what will we do with our results? Now, I know this is kind of a bit sneaky because it's sort of a 2-in-1 question, so perhaps I should say 4 questions, but by getting really clear on why you want to measure your impact and how you're going to use those results will help you to understand, what level of rigor, excuse me, what level of rigor you'll need to take in your impact assessments, whether monetization is necessary or whether just counting the number of outcomes you've achieved is enough, whether you're going to do impact measurement in an ongoing way for like improvement of your programs, or if it's just a one-off. If it's a one-off, you might be better off just getting a consulting firm to help you out. But if you want to do that in an ongoing way, then obviously that's not usually very sustainable. The second question I recommend people ask themselves is, realistically, what resources do I have to put towards impact measurement? You want to be clear about what your budget is, what staffing resources you have, if any. That will help you to get clear on, well, what can you actually achieve with the resources that you have? And the third question is, what's your internal capacity and level of expertise? Do you have that within your organization? If you don't, what's the best way to get that in? Do you need training, or do you need to employ people with that as expertise? Or is that where, again, using a consultant externally may be the best option for you? So getting clear on those couple of questions, I should say 3, maybe 4 questions, will put you in a good position for deciding the right impact measurement approach. Now, so what is the ASVB? We usually find the easiest way to explain this is by breaking it down into 2 components. We have the ASVB calculator. Sorry, bear with me. So we have the ASVB calculator, which is our online tool that allows you to calculate your social impact using cost-benefit analysis. And then we have our bank of wellbeing values. And these wellbeing values are pre-populated within our online calculator. Now, we use cost-benefit analysis as the methodology within our value calculator, as it's currently the gold standard recommended by governments as best practice across the OECD. So if you look at the New South Wales outcome budgeting reform, for example, cost-benefit analysis is the evaluation methodology used to ensure programs are providing net benefits to New South Wales, and it's also the methodology that they require for new business case proposals. So it really is, still considered best practice, even though it's been around for a long time. And very simply, using cost-benefit analysis, we're comparing costs to benefits, as the name suggests. And to do this, we need the costs and the benefits to be in the same metric or unit. And that's why we convert the value of our social outcomes into dollars, so we can determine if the benefits created are greater than the costs to deliver the program. Now, we use wellbeing valuation to convert the value of these non-market goods, so any good that can't be bought or sold in a market, like your social outcomes. So we use wellbeing valuation to convert them into dollar terms. And the real strength of our value calculator is that it's pre-populated with these wellbeing values. So to use the calculator, you basically need to select the program from the drop-down list, enter how many people achieve the outcome, or your beneficiaries, so the number of beneficiaries, and those beneficiaries can be broken down into 3 age categories and whether they live in a capital city or not. And then you enter how much it costs you to deliver the program. And basically, the value calculator will then calculate the net benefits your program creates to society, producing an impact statement for you to download and share. Now, if you have the ability to do a bespoke cost-benefit analysis yourself or an SROI, you can use the ASVB wellbeing values within your own calculations, as they're the largest, most rigorous set of social values currently in Australia. So now I'm just going to highlight some of the core advantages and functionality of the ASVB. It's been designed to be user-friendly so that anyone can use the tool. The bank currently has 63 primary benefit values, which can be differentiated by age and region. Primary benefits are the improvement in well-being experienced by people impacted in your program. So basically the well-being values that we've just been talking about. And the ASVB is also the only model in the world that we know of to include both primary and secondary benefit values, which are things like cost savings to government. It's also the only model to account for negative impacts in full, ensuring conservative estimations. Many other valuation methodologies only value the positive outcomes, but because the wellbeing valuation approach looks at the average improvements in wellbeing across a large group, it also captures all of the negative outcomes experienced by people within that sample. Now, one of the challenges that we mentioned earlier is knowing what data to collect. So we supply a set of survey instruments to collect data from stakeholders so that you know what evidence you need to collect to apply the outcome values. And these survey questions come from the original data sets, so either the Hilda survey or the Journeys Home survey, so that that maintains that level of rigor, that the values have been derived based on those questions, and that you are also ensuring that your participants are achieving those same outcomes based on the same questions. Now, the ASVB provides full cost benefit analysis functionality, so to automatically calculate your program's net benefits to society. And to do this, there are a number of behind the scenes calculations that account for things like dead weight, opportunity costs, and optimism bias within the value calculator to ensure that all aspects of the model are aligned to best practice policy evaluation guidelines as set out by the OECD and governments of UK, US, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, to name a few. So if you've applied the methodology correctly, you can have confidence in the impact statements produced by the ASVB. Now, I just want to touch briefly on the methodology and why we focus on wellbeing. So with this approach, we consider any outcome in the context of what's the impact on an individual's subjective well-being. It's like a common indicator that we use across all outcomes. Now, GDP was previously recognised as the gold standard measure of progress across the world, but it has come under increasing criticism, even more so during the pandemic, as not being a good indicator of how a country's people are faring. There are many examples of countries having a high GDP whilst their people live with extreme inequalities and poverty. Wellbeing is a recognised and established national and international societal measure of progress, and it's being adopted by more and more governments. New Zealand made headlines with the introduction of their wellbeing budget a couple of years back, and it looks like at this stage, Victoria may be the first Australian government to move in this direction, although I have heard, off the record, some credible rumours that Western Australia might have some proposals on the table for consideration. Now, one of the advantages of wellbeing valuation is that there are already large data sets available that include subjective wellbeing measure, income, and the demographic data that we need to be able to analyse the data for wellbeing valuation. So it makes it a really cost-effective approach when these existing data sets can be used. And so we could use, like a wellbeing improvement scale to evaluate programs. And in a sense, this is kind of what New South Wales has done across their programs by introducing the Personal Wellbeing Index survey. But money is a common currency that we all instantly understand. I mean, as very small children, nearly all cultures are taught the value of money. So wellbeing valuation allows people to instantly comprehend the value of a particular level of improvement in wellbeing, as well as allowing us to consider the cost effectiveness of programs. And by having a consistent valuation methodology with wellbeing as the common indicator, it allows us to compare the social value created by different programs, whether that's in health or in housing. We can compare the value of those outcomes created by our programs. Now, here is our list of 63 wellbeing values covering all areas of Australian life. We are currently developing a couple of additional values, so stay tuned to find out what they are. I'll actually share a copy of this in the chat window. Let me just check. Except I don't have it in my chat window. I will just quickly pop that up if you'll bear with me. It's always the way, isn't it, when you do things on the fly? Here we go. Now, just sharing that now. So if you pop over the chat window, you can, under the handout section, you can download that list of outcomes so that you have that to view. And if you're considering using the ASVB, it's really the first place that you should start. Really, you want to see that if we have outcomes that align to the primary activities that you deliver. Now, because of the way that we derive our wellbeing values, we really have to be careful about how we select our outcomes to avoid double counting. So to select the correct values in the ASVB, we think of each of your activities as a separate program. And each program should have a primary outcome that you're trying to achieve, because all the sub-outcomes will already be encapsulated in the main outcome you select. So for example, if you're working in housing and you house someone who was homeless, the increased sense of safety and improvement in self-esteem would already be included in that wellbeing value of moving from homelessness to secure housing. So you shouldn't add these other values on top. This value would also include any negative experiences that some people may experience, such as feelings of increased sense of pressure for having to pay rent, for example. And the impact of all of these positive and negative experiences would be averaged in the value. So check out our outcomes list and see if the social outcomes you create are included in our list. Now, if the outcome that you deliver or the outcomes that you deliver aren't in the current list, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't use the ASVB. Sometimes we can use what we call a best fit type indicator, or with some investment, a relevant wellbeing value could be developed and added to the bank. So if you have any questions about which outcomes could be applied to the work that you're doing, feel free to pop them in the chat, and I will come back and answer them at the end of the session if there's time. So the ASVB overcomes the 3 challenges that we discussed at the start of the presentation. We take away the complexity with our easy to use model. It's a resource light and very cost effective, and it provides credibility to your results. It offers simplicity with a comprehensive user guide, training, and ongoing support. The consistency of the model and valuation methodology allows you to compare across different programs, as well as aggregate the social value of different programs across your organisation or across a region. The ASVB can also be used for forecasting to make decisions about where to invest your money. So you can run scenarios of different programs to decide which program will deliver more social value. And this is the ideal use case for funders trying to compare tender submissions. It provides clarity in that everyone understands the dollar results and the cost-benefit analysis methodology that we've applied. There's transparency in the automatically generated impact statements, which outline all of your assumptions and have deadweight, opportunity cost, and optimism bias. So anyone reading your statement knows how you've applied the tool. And currently, there is no other tool that does the same thing. No other tool values your outcomes. Most other online impact measurement platforms that are available in the market are data collection tools with dashboard visualization. So they might help you to collect your survey data, and then they compile that and will give you pretty, pie charts and that kind of thing around your numbers of outcomes that you've achieved, but they actually don't do any of the social value calculation. Now, we have a very diverse range of organisations using the ASVB, from large global corporates like Lendlease down to micro social enterprises and non-for-profits. And this is really made possible by our sliding fee scale, which makes the ASVB accessible to any sized organisation. We also offer a grant and subsidy program, which is supported through the sale of our very large subscriptions and allows micro, non-for-profits and social enterprises to apply for a free, totally supported 12-month subscription. So if you possibly fall into that category, head to our website, have a look, fill out the one-pager grant application form, and we'll be in touch. So some of the benefits you receive by subscribing to the ASVB is that you have access to a total impact measurement solution. You get 12 months access to the value calculator for an unlimited number of users across your organisation, and you can run an unlimited number of calculations throughout that 12-month period and download an unlimited number of impact statements. You'll have access to the largest and most robust set of social values in Australia, applied using cost-benefit analysis, which aligns to best practice guidelines. As part of your subscription, you'll get free onboarding and training for all staff to make sure everyone's comfortable in using the ASVB. And on top of this, you get access to specialist support throughout your 12-month subscription period to review any of your impact statements or provide advice about how best to apply the ASVB to specific programs. You'll also have access to our online community of practice LinkedIn group and live training sessions where you can participate in collective learning and share best practice with other ASVB users. You'll also have access to live and on-demand webinars and training, as well as early bird priority access to masterclass opportunities. All of this will cost you less than paying a consultant to produce a single impact assessment, and you will have increased the capacity of your organisation to understand, calculate, and deliver social value. Now, finally, I'm going to open up the very last poll. Which seems to have also disappeared. I'm not having much luck with my resources. All right, well, we won't do the last poll. That's okay. Was just going to ask you, what are the most important ASVB benefits for you? So if you want, you can just pop that in the chat and tell me which of those things are the most important to you. Now, just before we head into the Q&A, if you're keen to dive deeper into how to use the tool, you can register for our How to Calculate Social Value webinar via the link in the chat window, or you can just go straight to our training page on our website. I'd also recommend that if you're interested in staying up to date with what we're doing and new webinars and new values that are being developed, that it's worth signing up to our mailing list, which you can also do via the website. You can also download our user guide and outcomes list from our website as well, or the outcomes list is in the chat window for you to download now. And now I'm just going to jump over quickly and have a look at the chat window to see what questions we have. Okay, so we've got a question here from Chris. Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining us. And Chris wants to know, what if the outcome of our program is not in the list? Great question, Chris. So you have a couple of options. You can use a best fit value or a proxy from the list. And this means that you try and find a similar type outcome, such as In one of our case studies, we use adequate computer skills, that outcome, as the value for seniors who've been taught how to use a mobile phone. So that's an example. It's not a perfect match, but we justify that by saying that having computer skills, that they're learning similar applications on the phone, like email, social media, a range of other skills, and that these days mobile phones are very similar to a computer. So that's the proxy that, or the best fit value that we use in that example. Or another example of, say, a proxy might be that you've supported people to access, say, mental health services, and we don't have a value for that in the bank currently, but you might use our value for accessing family violence services as a proxy. So, you could say, well, we don't have that value currently, so we've used that thinking that it may have a similar level of value. But if it's an outcome that doesn't really have a best fit sort of value in the list, then we can look at developing additional values. And we work in partnership with our users to develop new values to add to the bank. So if that's of interest to you, please feel free to book a time with me and we can have a chat about what values you're interested in adding to the bank. You will get that link in the follow-up email, so you can book a time directly with me and we can discuss that. So thanks for that question, Chris. I hope that answered it adequately. Let's just have a look. Okay, we might have time for another question. So here's one from Bianca. Hi, Bianca. Thanks for joining us. She says here, we work with refugees to get employment. Would your values still apply? Okay, so at the moment, like I mentioned, we have two data sets that we use. We have the Hilda survey, which is based on a survey of the average Australian, so it's representative of the Australian community. And then we also have the Journeys Home survey, which is based on people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. So a much more disadvantaged group of people were surveyed. So what that means is when we use those values, the values taken from the Hilda, so for example, if you move from unemployment to full-time employment, if that value is taken from the Hilda, then that's the value for the average Australian to get a full-time job. If we look at some of the values that have been taken from the Journeys Home survey, then they really apply to those more disadvantaged, vulnerable type client groups. And so, for example, we have a value there around commencing education, like commencing a certificate. And so, obviously that would be worth a lot more to that person who, perhaps is homeless to commence education than it would be for the average Australian to do that. So if we apply those values to the opposite cohort, for example, then that's something that we would add in our assumptions. And sorry, I know I'm going a very long-winded way to answer your question. I promise you I am going there. So with refugees, if you applied a value that's been derived from the Hilda survey, then it's likely those values would be an underestimation of the value to a refugee person or a migrant, because they would face additional barriers, such as English, for example. Having said that, we do have a value for, improved English skills for people from a non-English speaking background. So we would have a value that applies there. But generally speaking, for example, if we were talking about an employment program such as yours for people who are refugees, then it's likely our employment values from the Hilda would overestimate. So what you would do is you would use those values and then you would say, we believe that this is an underestimation of the value created by the program. However, what we could do is then develop, say, employment outcomes specific to refugees. And the way we go about doing that is first we go back to the HILDA and we look at the sample size of people who identified as a refugee within the HILDA survey, and we'd see if that sample size was large enough. And if it was, then we could derive values based on that data set. If it wasn't, there are some other data sets that longitudinal data sets done by government specific to refugees, and so we could look at using those data sets to actually use wellbeing valuation to look at creating wellbeing values for specific to refugees. So sorry, that was a very long-winded answer to your question. But yes, so kind of as an interim, you would use the values that exist in the data set in the outcomes list now, but that you could go on to develop more specific values. Okay, well, I think with that answer, I have probably come to time. So I think we'll wrap it up for questions there. If I haven't got to your question, I'm sorry about that, but I will follow up in an email. So I guess that brings us to the end of how the ASVB makes impact measurement simple. And you will get a link to this recording in a follow-up email, as well as the link to my calendar, so that if you want to book a time with me to speak about whether the ASVB is a good fit for your organisation, you can certainly do so via that link. So I'd just like to thank you all for joining me today, and I really want to wish you good luck on your social value journey. Bye for now.